In the sprawling metropolis of New Geneva Station, where 1,000 alien species mingled in the corridors of the galaxy's most prestigious combat academy, humans were considered the ultimate joke, weak, slow, fragile, little more than walking bags of water that somehow stumbled into space travel. The Zephyrians, with their lightning reflexes, mocked them. The crystalline Vorthek laughed at their brittle bones. Even the slug-like Mortani considered humans beneath contempt. But Marcus Chen was about to prove that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from what you're born with, but from what you're forced to overcome. In 13 seconds, everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity would shatter like glass against an iron fist. What they didn't know was that Marcus carried something no alien species possessed: the accumulated fury of a lifetime of being underestimated and the desperate hunger of someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. Marcus Chen pressed his face against the cold viewport of the transport shuttle, watching New Geneva Station grow larger with each passing minute. The massive structure hung in space like a steel flower, its petals unfolding into docking bays that could accommodate ships from every corner of the galaxy. Somewhere in those gleaming corridors was the Galactic Combat Academy, the most elite fighting institution in known space. And somehow, impossibly, Marcus had been accepted. The irony wasn't lost on him. At 17, he was probably the most unimpressive human who had ever set foot on the station. Standing barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, with the kind of thin frame that made clothes hang loose on him like scarecrow rags, Marcus looked more like someone who should be shelving books in a library than training alongside the galaxy's deadliest warriors. The other passengers on the shuttle gave him curious glances. Most were aliens, towering Krillian warriors with their 4 arms and metallic skin, graceful Selenites whose translucent bodies seemed to flow like liquid mercury, and at least 3 species Marcus couldn't even identify. The few humans aboard were all older, broader, more obviously suited for combat training. Marcus caught snippets of their conversations, whispered speculations about why someone like him was even here. He knew exactly why. His acceptance letter had been brutally honest about it. The Academy was required by galactic law to maintain a certain percentage of human students, and Marcus had been the only applicant from Earth who met even the minimum physical requirements. He wasn't there because he was promising. He was there because they needed to fill a quota. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud that reverberated through the hull. Marcus gathered his single duffel bag. Everything he owned fit inside it, and followed the stream of passengers into the station proper. The corridors were vast, designed to accommodate beings of every conceivable size and shape. Overhead, holographic signs flickered in dozens of languages, including the harsh angular script of Standard Galactic that Marcus had spent the last year learning to read. His first stop was the registration hall, a cavernous space filled with floating information kiosks and processing stations. Marcus joined the queue behind a group of Vorthak cadets, their crystalline bodies chiming musically as they moved. One of them, a towering figure whose faceted surface reflected the hall's lights in prismatic rainbows, noticed Marcus and nudged his companions. "Look," the alien said in Standard Galactic, his voice like breaking glass. "They actually sent us a human." The others turned to stare. Marcus kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, but he could feel the weight of their attention. He'd grown used to being stared at during his year of preparation on Earth, where his acceptance to the Academy had made him something of a celebrity. But this was different. This wasn't admiration or even curiosity. This was the kind of look people gave to a pet dog that had somehow learned to walk on its hind legs. Amusing, but ultimately pointless. "I thought they were keeping humans out of combat training now," another Vorthak said. "After what happened to the last batch." Marcus had read about the last batch. 12 humans had entered the Academy 5 years ago. 3 had washed out during the first week. 4 more had suffered injuries severe enough to require medical withdrawal. The remaining 5 had graduated, but only barely, placing in the bottom percentile of their class. None of them had gone on to significant military careers. "Waste of resources," the first Vorthak continued. "Look at it. One good hit and it would shatter like ceramic." Marcus finally reached the front of the line. The registration officer was a Mortani, one of the slug-like species that served as administrators throughout the galaxy due to their legendary bureaucratic efficiency. Its eye stalk swiveled to examine Marcus from multiple angles before focusing on the tablet in front of it. "Name," it said in a voice like wet gravel. "Marcus Chen, Earth designation, Human 7, 7 Alpha." The Mortani's eye stalks flicked back to Marcus, then to its tablet, then back to Marcus again. "You're smaller than your measurements indicated." "I might have grown since the physical exam," Marcus lied. He'd actually lost weight during his preparation year, too nervous to eat properly most days. The Mortani made a note on its tablet. "Dormitory assignment is Block 7, Room 2847. Your combat class assignment is..." It paused, eye stalks weaving in what Marcus recognized as the Mortani equivalent of confusion. "This must be an error." "What kind of error?" "You're assigned to advanced combat theory with Master Kethvar." The Mortani's entire body seemed to droop. "Master Kethvar teaches only the most elite students." There must have been a clerical mistake. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd spent the last year studying every aspect of the Academy's curriculum. Master Kethvar was a legend, a former Krillian military commander who had never taken a human student. His classes were reserved for the cadets most likely to become galactic military officers, not quota fillers from Earth. "Can you check again?" Marcus asked. The Mortani ran through its tablet data twice before shaking its head. "The assignment stands, though I suspect you won't be there long." It handed Marcus a datapad containing his schedule and dormitory information. "Report to your room, then to Master Kethvar's classroom at 0800 tomorrow. Try not to embarrass your species too badly." Marcus took the datapad and shouldered his bag. The walk to Block 7 took him through the Academy's main plaza, where groups of alien cadets clustered around information displays and training equipment demonstrations. He caught fragments of conversation in a dozen languages, but the tone was universal: excitement, anticipation, the nervous energy of warriors preparing for battle. He felt like a fraud walking among them. Block 7 was one of the newer dormitory complexes, its corridors lined with doors that adjusted their size automatically to accommodate each resident species. Room 2847 was on the upper level, accessed by a lift that seemed to take forever. When the doors finally opened, Marcus found himself face to face with his roommate. The alien was roughly humanoid in shape, but there the similarities ended. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, with skin that looked like polished obsidian and 4 arms ending in clawed hands, it was clearly one of the Krillians. Intricate silver markings covered its body in patterns that Marcus recognized as military decorations. This wasn't just any Krillian. This was a warrior from one of their most decorated clans. "You must be the human," the alien said in perfect standard galactic. Its voice was deep and resonant, carrying undertones that suggested vast strength held in careful check. "I am Thexai of the Iron Ridge clan. I had requested a roommate of appropriate combat potential, but apparently the Academy has a sense of humor." Marcus stepped into the room, which was spartanly furnished with 2 sleeping alcoves, a shared study area, and personal storage units. Everything was scaled for beings much larger than him. He'd probably need a step stool to reach his bed. "I'm Marcus Chen," he said, "and I know this is awkward, but I didn't ask to be here any more than you asked for me." Thexai studied him with yellow eyes that seemed to catalog every weakness. "You misunderstand. I am not displeased with the arrangement. It will be educational to observe a human's limitations firsthand. I have never seen one break under pressure. I'm not planning to break. They never do." Thexai returned to organizing his belongings, each movement economical and precise. "I have studied the Academy's records. No human has ever placed higher than the bottom quarter of their class. Most wash out entirely. The longest any human has lasted in Master Kethvar's class is 4 days." Marcus unpacked his few possessions in silence. His clothes looked pathetic next to Thexai's gleaming armor and ceremonial weapons. His study materials, printed books from Earth, seemed primitive compared to the Krillian's holographic data crystals. "Why did you come here?" Thekshai asked suddenly. Marcus paused in his unpacking. It was a question he'd been asking himself for months. "Because I was accepted. That is not a reason. That is merely an opportunity. Why did you choose to seize it?" Marcus thought about the honest answer. He thought about his life on Earth, the endless string of foster homes after his parents died, the constant struggle just to survive, the way everyone looked at him like he was already defeated. He thought about the morning he'd received his acceptance letter, how he'd read it 17 times before believing it was real. "Because I'm tired of being told what I can't do," he said finally. Thekshai's head tilted slightly. "Interesting. Most humans I have encountered seem to accept their limitations. They find comfort in knowing their place." "Maybe I'm not most humans. Perhaps. We shall see tomorrow. Master Kethvar has a way of revealing what beings are truly made of. I suspect yours will be disappointment and water, but I have been wrong before." That night, Marcus lay in his sleeping alcove staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, he could hear alien voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize, the sounds of beings preparing for challenges he could barely imagine. Somewhere in the distance, training weapons clashed against practice targets. In 12 hours, he would walk into Master Kethvar's classroom. In 12 hours, he would begin proving to the galaxy exactly what humans were capable of. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, for the first time in his life, Marcus Chen smiled in the dark. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. And he had nothing left to lose. Marcus arrived at Master Kethvar's classroom 15 minutes early, hoping to avoid the spectacle of walking in after the alien students had already assembled. The corridor outside was empty except for floating maintenance drones that hummed quietly as they polished the walls. The classroom door was sealed, displaying a holographic notice in multiple languages that simply read, "Enter when ready to begin." The surface scanned him briefly before sliding open with a whisper of recycled air. The classroom was unlike anything Marcus had expected. Instead of desks and chairs, the space was dominated by a circular arena perhaps 50 feet in diameter, its floor covered with some kind of energy-absorbing material that seemed to drink in light. Tiered seating rose around the arena on 3 sides, while the 4th side was occupied by a raised platform where a single figure stood motionless. Master Kethvar was even more imposing than the holographs had suggested. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, his 4-armed frame was encased in ceremonial armor that bore the scars of 1,000 battles. His face, or what Marcus could see of it beneath his ornate helmet, was a map of old wounds and weathered chitin. When he turned his attention to Marcus, his eyes glowed with an inner light that seemed to see straight through flesh and bone. "Human," Kethvar said, his voice carrying easily across the arena without seeming to be raised. "You are early. This suggests either admirable dedication or pathological anxiety. We shall determine which." Marcus climbed the steps to the seating area, choosing a spot in the middle tier where he hoped to remain inconspicuous. Other students began filing in shortly after, a mix of species that represented the galaxy's military elite. Krillians like his roommate Texai, who nodded slightly when their eyes met. Vorthak warriors whose crystalline bodies caught and refracted the arena's lighting. Selenites who seemed to flow into their seats like living water. A few other species Marcus recognized from his studies, and several he didn't. Notably, there were no other humans. "Settle yourselves," Kethvar commanded as the last students took their seats. "Today we begin with practical demonstration. Combat theory without combat application is merely philosophy, and philosophy has never won a war." A section of the arena floor split open, revealing an armory filled with training weapons of every conceivable type. Energy staffs that crackled with controlled lightning, monomolecular blades that could slice through steel like paper, projectile weapons that fired hardened gel rounds designed to incapacitate rather than kill. "Each of you will demonstrate your species' traditional combat form," Kethvar announced. "I will evaluate your technique, identify your weaknesses, and determine whether you possess the potential to transcend the limitations of your birth." His glowing eyes swept across the assembled students. "Who will begin?" A Krillian in the front row stood immediately. Marcus recognized the type, one of their warrior caste, probably from a family with military traditions stretching back millennia. The alien descended to the arena floor and selected a pair of curved energy blades that hummed with barely contained power. What followed was a display of martial artistry that left Marcus breathless. The Krillian moved through a complex kata that seemed to involve all four arms in perfect coordination, the energy blades tracing patterns in the air that were both beautiful and terrifying. Every movement was precise, controlled, deadly. When he finished, the arena was silent except for the quiet hum of the energy weapons powering down. "Adequate," Kethvar said. "Your form is traditional but predictable. In actual combat, you would last perhaps 30 seconds against an opponent who had studied Krillian techniques. Next, a Vorthak rose to take its turn. The crystalline being selected a sonic disruptor that resonated with its natural frequency, creating standing waves that could shatter molecular bonds. Its demonstration was more restrained than the Krillians, focusing on precise strikes that would target an opponent's weak points. Each movement created harmonic frequencies that made Marcus's teeth ache. "Competent," Kethvar judged. "You understand your weapon's capabilities, but you fight like a Vorthak. Your enemies will expect this." Next, student after student descended to the arena floor. Each demonstration was impressive in its own way, showcasing combat traditions that had been refined over thousands of years. Yet Kethvar found fault with every performance, pointing out predictable patterns, traditional weaknesses, the kind of flaws that would prove fatal in real combat. As the demonstrations continued, Marcus felt a growing sense of dread. These were some of the most naturally gifted warriors in the galaxy, beings born and bred for combat. If Kethvar found them lacking, what hope did a human have? "Next," Kethvar called. The arena fell silent. Marcus looked around and realized with growing horror that he was the only student who hadn't performed. Every alien eye in the chamber was fixed on him, waiting to see what the human would do. "Human," Kethvar said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been amusement. "Your demonstration awaits." Marcus stood on unsteady legs. The walk down to the arena floor felt like a death march. The armory's weapons all looked impossibly large and dangerous. He'd trained with some earth martial arts during his preparation year, but nothing that would translate to alien weaponry. He selected the simplest weapon he could find, a staff made of some kind of adaptive metal that adjusted its weight and balance to the wielder's grip. At least it was familiar. He'd practiced with similar weapons in the Earth dojos, though never with alien technology. "Begin when ready," Kethvar instructed. Marcus took a position in the center of the arena. Around him, the alien students leaned forward in their seats, probably hoping to witness the exact moment when the human humiliated himself beyond recovery. He began with a simple staff form he'd learned years ago, one of the few things that had stayed with him through all the chaos of his childhood. The movements were basic: strikes, blocks, spins, nothing like the spectacular displays the aliens had put on. He felt clumsy and slow compared to what had come before. "Pathetic," someone whispered in the stands. Marcus stumbled slightly, his concentration broken. The staff felt heavy in his hands now, unwieldy. He tried to continue the form but could feel everything falling apart. This was exactly what everyone expected. The human failing to measure up, proving once again that his species didn't belong among real warriors. "Stop," Kethvar commanded. Marcus froze mid-movement, the staff held awkwardly across his body. Around him, he could hear the alien students shifting in their seats, probably embarrassed on his behalf. That, Kethvar said slowly, was indeed pathetic. Marcus felt his face burn with shame. He'd known this would happen, but experiencing it was worse than he'd imagined. "However," Kethvar continued, his tone shifting slightly, "it was not pathetic in the way I expected." The arena fell completely silent. "Each student who preceded you demonstrated their species' traditional forms with competence," the master said, beginning to pace along the edge of the arena. "Each showed me exactly what I anticipated seeing: Krillian bladework, Vorthak sonic manipulation, selenite flow combat. all predictable, all limited by the boundaries of their evolution. He stopped directly in front of Marcus. "You, human, showed me something I have never seen before in this classroom. Do you know what that was?" Marcus shook his head, not trusting his voice. "Adaptation," Kethvar said. "Every other student performed movements their species has been practicing for millennia, refined through countless generations of warrior breeding. You picked up an alien weapon and attempted to use it despite having no evolutionary preparation for its balance or capabilities. In any other species, such adaptation would take generations to achieve." Marcus stared at him, not sure he was understanding correctly. "Your technique was clumsy," Kethvar continued. "Your form was amateur, your power was negligible, but your adaptability, the master's eyes seemed to brighten. That is something that cannot be taught. It can only be refined." Kethvar turned to address the entire class. The fundamental flaw in every demonstration today, save one, was predictability. You fight as your species has always fought. In war, this makes you vulnerable. Your enemies study your patterns, prepare counters, exploit your evolutionary limitations. He gestured toward Marcus. This human has no such limitations. He has no established patterns to break. He is, in essence, a blank slate upon which any combat form might be written. The alien students were staring at Marcus with new expressions. Not mockery now, but something closer to wariness. "Tomorrow," Kethvar announced, "we will begin the real work. Human remain after class. The rest of you are dismissed." As the alien students filed out, Marcus caught fragments of their conversations. Words like adaptation and unpredictable and dangerous. Thexai paused at the arena's edge, looking down at Marcus with something that might have been respect. "Perhaps I was wrong about disappointment and water," the Krillian said quietly before following the others out. When the classroom was empty except for Marcus and Kethvar, the master descended from his platform. Up close, Marcus could see the fine details of the aliens' battle scars, each one telling a story of survival against impossible odds. "Do you understand what happened here today, human?" "Not really," Marcus admitted. "You were mocked by your classmates, dismissed as inferior, expected to fail." Kethvar's voice carried the weight of experience. How did this make you feel? Marcus thought about lying, about giving some diplomatic answer that wouldn't offend an alien master, but something in Kethvar's manner suggested that honesty was the only acceptable response. "Angry," he said. "Good. Anger is a tool properly applied. But anger without focus is merely rage, and rage gets warriors killed." Kethvar picked up the staff Marcus had been using, testing its weight with casual expertise. "Tomorrow we begin teaching you to focus that anger into something useful. We begin teaching you to become truly dangerous." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why help me when everyone else thinks I'm just a waste of space?" Kethvar's expression was unreadable behind his helmet. "Because in my experience, the greatest warriors are not those born to strength. They are those who must earn every victory through will alone. Your classmates inherited their capabilities from millions of years of evolutionary refinement. You will have to create yours from nothing." He handed the staff back to Marcus. "That process of creation, human, is what transforms adequate fighters into legends. Report here tomorrow at 06000. Wear clothing you can afford to lose. We have much work to do." As Marcus left the classroom, he felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of someone with no other options, but the solid, determined hope of someone who had finally found their path. Behind him, Master Kethvar stood alone in the arena, studying the scuff marks left by the day's training. In 13 years of teaching, he had trained hundreds of students. Most became competent soldiers, a few became exceptional warriors. But he had never encountered raw material quite like this human. Predictable opponents could be countered. Unpredictable opponents could only be survived. Tomorrow, the real education would begin. Marcus arrived at Kethvar's classroom at 0600 exactly, having barely slept. The corridors were empty except for maintenance drones and the occasional early-rising alien heading to morning training sessions. When he pressed his hand to the door panel, it opened immediately as if the master had been waiting for him. The arena had been transformed overnight. Training equipment filled the space, striking posts, balance beams, weights that could adjust their mass through gravitational manipulation, and weapons of every conceivable type. In the center stood Master Kethvar, no longer wearing his ceremonial armor but simple training garments that somehow made him even more intimidating. "You are punctual," the master observed. "This is encouraging. Many species confuse enthusiasm with commitment. We shall determine which you possess." Marcus descended to the arena floor, noting that his legs felt steadier today. Yesterday's humiliation had been replaced by something harder to define. Not confidence exactly, but a kind of grim determination. "Before we begin," Kethvar said, "you will understand the nature of the task before you. Your classmates will train for 2 years to refine techniques their species has perfected over millennia. You have the same 2 years to create an entirely new form of combat from nothing." Most would consider this impossible. Most would probably be right, Marcus admitted. Yes, but impossibility is simply another word for hasn't been done yet. Kethvar moved to a weapons rack and selected a simple training knife. "Today we begin with the fundamentals. Not of any particular martial art, but of violence itself. Show me your natural response to aggression." Without warning, Kethvar attacked. The alien moved faster than Marcus had thought possible, the training knife cutting through air where Marcus's throat had been a split second before. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet as he tried to avoid the follow-up strikes. The master's forearms created a whirlwind of controlled violence, each movement precise and economical. Marcus managed to dodge for perhaps 10 seconds before a blow caught him across the ribs, dropping him to his knees. The knife stopped inches from his neck. "Interesting," Kethvar said, stepping back. "Your classmates would have attempted to block using their species' traditional methods. They would have failed predictably. You simply avoided the attacks entirely." Marcus struggled to his feet, his ribs aching where Kethvar had struck him. "I didn't have much choice. I can't block attacks from someone like you. You cannot match alien strength, speed, or reach. Therefore, you must think differently." Kethvar returned to the weapons rack. Traditional martial arts assume certain physical capabilities. Remove those assumptions, and entirely new possibilities emerge. The master spent the next hour demonstrating various attacks while Marcus tried to avoid them. It was exhausting, humiliating work. Marcus was knocked down dozens of times, struck from angles he didn't see coming, caught in positions where escape seemed impossible. But gradually he began to notice patterns. "You're faster than me," Marcus said during a brief rest, "but you telegraph your attacks. All 4 arms move in coordination, but that means I can read your intentions from your shoulder positioning." Kethvar's expression was unreadable. "Continue. And you're fighting like I'm another Krillian. You're aiming for targets that would be vital points on your species, center mass, primary joints. But human anatomy is different. Our weak points aren't where you're expecting them to be." "Demonstrate!" Marcus picked up a training knife, feeling its weight and balance. It was designed for Krillian physiology, too heavy for his grip, poorly balanced for human hands. But perhaps that was an advantage. His opponents would expect him to use it like a Krillian would. When Kethvar attacked again, Marcus didn't try to block or counter in any traditional sense. Instead, he dropped low and rolled between the master's legs, coming up behind him in a position no 4-armed opponent could easily reach. The training knife found the gap between Kethvar's shoulder blades, not a killing blow for a Krillian, but a disabling one. "Acceptable," Kethvar said. "You begin to understand. Your weaknesses force you to find unconventional solutions. Now we make this instinctive." The training that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. Instead of learning established forms, he was pushed to develop responses in real time. Kethvar would attack with different weapons from different angles with varying degrees of force. Marcus learned to read the subtle tells that preceded each assault to position himself where his opponent's advantages became disadvantages. Days blurred together. Marcus would arrive before dawn and leave well after sunset, his body accumulating bruises and small cuts that served as reminders of each lesson learned the hard way. He stopped eating in the common dining areas, partly to avoid the stares of his classmates, but mostly because he was too exhausted to care about food. HFY would find him each evening in their shared room, barely able to stand upright. "You are pushing yourself beyond reasonable limits," the Krillian observed after Marcus collapsed onto his sleeping alcove without bothering to remove his training clothes. "Even for a human, this is excessive." "Kethvar says I have to make up for millions of years of evolution in 2 years," Marcus mumbled into his pillow. "Reasonable limits aren't going to cut it. What if you break?" Marcus had been asking himself the same question. His body was constantly sore, his reflexes operating on pure muscle memory, because his conscious mind was too fatigued to process information properly. But something strange was happening. The more exhausted he became, the more natural his movements felt. The techniques Kethvar was teaching him were becoming instinctive. "Then I break," Marcus said, "but at least I'll have tried." Taxei was quiet for a moment. "There are rumors among the other students. They say Kethvar has never trained anyone as intensively as he trains you. What do they think that means? Some believe he is attempting to forge you into a weapon. Others think he is trying to break you systematically to prove that humans cannot be warriors." HFY's yellow eyes studied Marcus in the room's dim lighting. "Which do you believe?" Marcus had wondered the same thing during the countless hours of brutal training. Sometimes Kethvar pushed him so hard that collapse seemed inevitable, but there was something in the master's approach, a careful attention to exactly how much Marcus could endure before crossing the line into permanent damage. "I think he's trying to find out what I'm made of," Marcus said finally, "and I think maybe I am too." The breakthrough came during the 3rd week of training. Marcus was sparring against multiple opponents, training drones programmed to fight like different alien species. The exercise was designed to be impossible. The point was to see how long he could survive against overwhelming odds. Marcus had been fighting for nearly an hour, his movements becoming increasingly desperate as the drones adapted to his tactics. He was bleeding from a dozen minor cuts, his breathing ragged with exhaustion. The logical part of his mind was screaming at him to surrender, to accept defeat and end the punishment. Instead, something else took over. Marcus stopped thinking about individual opponents and started seeing the fight as a single system. The drones moved in patterns, created openings, generated rhythms that could be exploited. Instead of fighting 5 separate enemies, he began manipulating the entire engagement. He led one drone into the attack path of another, used a third as a shield against a fourth, created a cascade of position changes that left all 5 machines tangled and unable to coordinate. When the exercise ended, Marcus was still standing, barely, but standing. Kethvar shut down the training drones and approached. For the first time since their training had begun, the master seemed genuinely surprised. "Explain what happened," he commanded. Marcus wiped blood from a cut above his eye, trying to organize his thoughts. "I stopped fighting them individually. Started fighting the pattern instead, made them interfere with each other." "You achieved tactical synthesis under extreme stress," Kethvar said slowly. "This level of adaptive thinking typically requires years to develop. You accomplished it in weeks. Is that good? It is unprecedented." Kethvar moved to the equipment storage area and withdrew something Marcus had never seen before, a weapon that seemed to shift its shape based on how it was held. "This is a flux blade. It responds to the wielder's bioelectric field, adapting its form to optimize for whatever combat situation develops. It is traditionally given only to masters who have demonstrated perfect technique." Marcus took the weapon cautiously. The moment it touched his skin, he could feel it analyzing him, mapping his nervous system, learning his reflexes, adjusting its weight and balance to complement his movement patterns. "Why are you giving this to me?" "I'm nowhere near ready for something like this." "Because traditional readiness is not what we are creating," Kethvar replied. "Your classmates will graduate with mastery of their species' ancient techniques. You will graduate with something that has never existed before, a uniquely human approach to combat. This weapon will grow with you as that approach develops. Marcus took a few experimental swings. The flux blade felt like an extension of his nervous system, responding to his intentions almost before he was consciously aware of them. It was simultaneously the most natural and most alien sensation he'd ever experienced. "There is something else," Kethvar continued. "Tomorrow regular classes resume. You will train with your classmates in group exercises. They have had 3 weeks to refine their traditional techniques while you have been exploring alternatives. They're going to destroy me, aren't they? Perhaps. Or perhaps they will discover that their refined traditional techniques are less effective against an opponent who refuses to follow traditional patterns."
Kethvar's eyes seemed to glow with anticipation.
"We are about to conduct an interesting experiment, human. Let us see how your classmates respond to encountering something they have never fought before." That night, Marcus lay in his alcove staring at the flux blade in his hands. The weapon seemed to pulse with its own life, occasionally shifting form as it responded to his subconscious movements. Through the thin walls, he could hear his classmates preparing for tomorrow's classes. The confident sounds of warriors who knew exactly what to expect from combat. Tomorrow, Marcus would show them exactly how wrong their expectations could be. The real test was about to begin. The advanced combat classroom buzzed with the kind of energy that preceded violence. 53 of the galaxy's most promising young warriors had gathered for their first group sparring session since individual training began. Marcus sat in his usual spot in the middle tier, but today he wasn't alone in drawing stares. Word had spread about his private sessions with Master Kethvar. Some students watched him with curiosity, others with outright suspicion. A few seemed angry, as if his extra training represented some kind of unfair advantage. None of them looked worried. They should have been. "Today we test practical application of your refined techniques," Kethvar announced from his platform. The master's gaze swept across the assembled students before settling on Marcus for a moment. "You will face opponents from different species with different strengths using different combat philosophies. Adaptation will determine survival." The arena floor reconfigured itself, creating multiple smaller combat circles where individual matches could take place simultaneously. Training weapons emerged from concealed storage compartments, a vast array of alien armaments designed to test every conceivable fighting style. "Pairings are random," Kethvar continued. "No consideration will be given to physical disparities or species advantages. In war, you do not choose your enemies." A holographic display materialized, showing the first round of matches. Marcus found his name paired against Zexthai, one of the Vorthak students. The crystalline being stood nearly 9 feet tall, with appendages that could vibrate at frequencies capable of shattering bone. Its previous demonstration had been precise and deadly, showcasing thousands of years of Vorthak martial development. As they descended to the combat circles, Marcus caught fragments of conversation from the spectator sections. "Poor humans about to learn why his species doesn't produce warriors. I heard Zexthai once cracked a steel beam during practice. Should we alert medical college? This could get ugly fast." Marcus selected his flux blade from the weapons array. The moment his hand closed around the grip, the weapon analyzed the upcoming confrontation, scanning Zexthai's crystalline structure, calculating resonance frequencies, adjusting its molecular density to optimize for the fight ahead. Zexthai chose a pair of harmonic focus points, devices that would amplify its natural frequency manipulation into targeted attacks. The crystalline being moved to the center of their combat circle with a kind of fluid grace that suggested absolute confidence. "Combatants ready," Kethvar called out across the arena. Marcus shifted into the stance he'd developed during his private training, not quite like any established martial art, but optimized for his specific physiology and fighting style. His weight was distributed differently than alien stances would suggest, his guard positioned to protect vital points that most species didn't prioritize. "Begin." Zexthai attacked immediately, its harmonic focus points creating standing waves that turned the air itself into a weapon. The frequencies were precisely tuned to disrupt human nervous system function, a devastating attack against any normal opponent. Marcus wasn't there when the attack arrived. During his weeks of private training, Kethvar had forced him to develop superhuman spatial awareness. Marcus had learned to read attacks not just from body language but from the subtle environmental changes that preceded them. Air pressure variations, electromagnetic fluctuations, even the way dust motes moved in response to building energy fields. He'd felt Zexak's attack building before the vortex had even raised its focus points. Marcus rolled under the sonic assault, came up inside Zexthai's guard, and struck with the flux blade. The weapon had reconfigured itself into a thin, flexible form that could slip between the crystalline being's natural armor plates. The strike wasn't powerful enough to cause serious damage, but it hit nerves that Zexthai didn't expect a human to know about. The vortex stumbled backward, harmonic focus points wavering as it tried to compensate for the unexpected neural disruption. Marcus pressed his advantage, the flux blade shifting forms rapidly as he attacked from angles that vortex anatomy made difficult to defend. The match lasted 37 seconds. When Zexthai collapsed, twitching from accumulated nerve strikes, the arena had gone completely silent. In all the surrounding combat circles, other matches had stopped as students and instructors alike stared at the impossible sight. A human had just defeated one of the strongest vortex students in the class. "Medical assistance to Circle 3, Kethvar announced calmly, as if massive upsets happened every day. Next pairings will be displayed momentarily. Marcus helped Zexthai to the medical station where automated systems began treating the vortex neural disruption. The crystalline being's surface was flickering with chaotic light patterns that Marcus recognized as confusion. How? Zexthai managed to ask as medical drones attached monitoring sensors. No human should possess knowledge of vortex neural pathways. I don't, Marcus admitted, but I know what happens when crystalline structures are subjected to specific types of mechanical stress. Basic physics applies to everyone, regardless of species. As word of the upset spread through the arena, Marcus found himself facing a new problem. His next opponent was a Selenite warrior named Flohar, but the liquid mercury being was studying him with an entirely different kind of attention than it had shown before the first match. The element of surprise was gone. Now his opponents would be prepared for something unexpected. The second match taught Marcus that prepared opponents were actually more dangerous than confident ones. Flohar fought cautiously, probing for weaknesses without committing to any particular strategy. The Selenite's malleable body could adapt its shape to counter specific attacks, making it nearly impossible to land decisive strikes. Marcus found himself in the longest fight of his academy career, a grinding battle of attrition where neither opponent could gain a lasting advantage. The Flux Blade's ability to change configuration was matched by Flohar's ability to reshape itself in response. What should have been over in minutes stretched into nearly an hour of continuous combat. Finally, Marcus realized he was thinking about the problem wrong. Instead of trying to defeat Flohar's adaptive capability, he started using it against itself. He began attacking with patterns that forced the Selenite to adopt specific shapes, each one creating momentary vulnerabilities that the next attack could exploit. When Flohar finally collapsed from exhaustion, both fighters were barely able to stand. But Marcus was still standing. Impressive endurance for a human. Flohar managed as medical drones assisted it from the arena. Most would have broken long before the battle ended. Most humans have never had to fight for everything they've ever achieved, Marcus replied. By the time his third match was called, every eye in the arena was focused on Marcus. His opponent was Thexai, his own roommate. The Krillian warrior descended to the combat circle with all four arms moving in perfect coordination, his ceremonial weapons gleaming under the arena lights. I have been studying your techniques, Thexai said as they faced each other in the circle's center. You fight without pattern, without tradition. This makes you unpredictable, but also inefficient. My ancestors perfected their combat methods over millions of years. Today, I prove that evolution trumps improvisation. Marcus raised the flux blade, feeling the weapon respond to his elevated heart rate and adrenaline levels. Around the arena, alien students pressed forward in their seats, eager to see whether the human's success had been luck or skill. Your ancestors were fighting other Krillians, Marcus said. I'm something else entirely. The fight that followed was unlike anything the Academy had ever witnessed. HFY attacked with the full fury of Krillian military tradition, his forearms creating a whirlwind of coordinated destruction that should have overwhelmed any single opponent. But Marcus had spent weeks learning to fight exactly this type of enemy under Kethvar's merciless tutelage. He flowed around HFY's attacks like water around stones, the flux blade shifting forms so rapidly that it seemed to exist in multiple configurations simultaneously. When the Krellian committed to a traditional combination, Marcus was already 3 moves ahead, positioning himself for counters that exploited weaknesses in techniques that were thousands of years old. The match ended when Marcus managed to tangle all 4 of HFY's arms with the flux blade configured as an expanding net, leaving the Krillian helpless to defend against a finishing strike that stopped just short of vital targets. "Yield," HFY said quietly. As Marcus helped his roommate to his feet, he could hear the sounds of urgent conversations throughout the arena. Alien languages he didn't recognize, but the tone was universal: shock, confusion, and for the first time, something that might have been fear. "Well fought," HFY said. "I begin to understand why Master Kethvar invested such effort in your training. You are becoming something that has never existed before." "What's that? A human warrior worthy of the name." Master Kethvar's voice cut across the arena chatter. "Attention! Today's exercises have demonstrated an important principle. Traditional techniques, no matter how refined, are vulnerable to opponents who refuse to follow traditional patterns." His gaze swept across the assembled students. The human has won his matches not through superior strength or speed, but through superior adaptation. This is a lesson worth remembering. As the class was dismissed, Marcus found himself surrounded by a small crowd of alien students. Most seemed curious rather than hostile, asking questions about his techniques and training methods. A few wanted to examine the flux blade, marveling at its constant shape-shifting. But it was the students who said nothing that Marcus found most interesting. The ones who watched him from a distance, calculating looks in their alien eyes. They were beginning to see him not as a novelty or a quota filler, but as a potential threat. Tomorrow, Marcus knew, his training would enter an entirely new phase. He'd proven that humans could compete with alien warriors. Now he had to prove they could survive what came next. In his private chambers, Master Kethvar reviewed recordings of the day's matches. After 40 years of teaching, he thought he understood the principles of combat training. Today, his human student had forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew. The boy wasn't just learning to fight, he was evolving combat itself. And evolution, Kethvar knew, was never a peaceful process. 6 months had passed since Marcus's first victories in the arena, and the Academy had transformed around him. What began as curiosity about the human's unconventional techniques had evolved into something approaching respect, and in some quarters, genuine concern. His combat methodology had begun influencing other students, forcing them to question assumptions their species had held for millennia. The final examination was legendary even among Academy traditions. A single combat test against Master Kethvar himself conducted before the entire Academy faculty and student body. Most students who reached this point could expect to last 3 to 5 minutes against the Master's full capabilities. The record, held by a Krillian prodigy from a generation earlier, was 7 minutes and 43 seconds. No human had ever passed the final examination. Marcus stood in the preparation chamber adjacent to the Academy's grand arena, checking and rechecking the flux blade's configuration. The weapon had evolved along with his fighting style over the months, developing capabilities that even its original designers hadn't anticipated. It responded not just to his conscious intentions, but to his combat instincts, often shifting forms before Marcus was aware he needed a different weapon. "Nervous?" HFY asked. The Krillian had become something approaching a friend over their months as roommates, one of the few students who seemed genuinely supportive of Marcus's success rather than threatened by it. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "Kethvar has been holding back in all our training sessions. Today, he's going to show me what 40 years of combat experience really looks like." Perhaps, or perhaps you will show him what 6 months of impossible evolution looks like. Thexe's forearms moved in a gesture that Marcus had learned indicated respect among Krillian warriors. You have already achieved what every military theorist said was impossible. Today may simply be the day you make it official. The chamber's door chimed, indicating it was time. Marcus clipped the flux blade to his belt and walked toward what might be either graduation or humiliation. The grand arena was larger than any space he'd fought in before, its circular floor capable of accommodating opponents of any size. Tiered seating rose on all sides, filled with every student and instructor in the academy. He'd never seen so many alien faces focused on a single human before. Master Kethvar stood in the arena's center, wearing full ceremonial armor that gleamed under the brilliant lighting. At his side was a weapon Marcus had never seen before, a master's blade that seemed to bend light around its edge, creating an aura of distortion that made it difficult to look at directly. Marcus Chen of Earth. Kethvar's voice carried easily through the arena's acoustic systems. You stand before your final examination. Success means graduation with full honors. Failure means your time at this academy ends today. And do you accept these terms? I accept, Marcus replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Then assume position and prepare yourself. The test begins when you draw your weapon. Marcus walked to the center of the arena, positioning himself approximately 10 feet from where Kethvar waited. Around them, the assembled crowd had gone completely silent. Even the Academy's atmospheric system seemed to whisper more quietly. Marcus drew the flux blade. The weapon immediately began analyzing the arena environment, mapping distances and angles, calculating optimal attack vectors. Against Kethvar's master's blade, it felt almost primitive. Begin, Kethvar announced. For the first time in months, Marcus froze. Kethvar's opening attack was unlike anything Marcus had experienced during their training sessions. All 4 arms moved in perfect coordination, the master's blade creating cutting patterns that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The assault was so perfectly executed that Marcus couldn't identify any openings, any flaws, any points where a counterattack might be possible. Marcus did the only thing he could do. He ran. Not fled in panic, but executed a series of evasive movements that carried him around the arena's perimeter, staying just ahead of Kethvar's relentless assault. The master pursued with mechanical precision, each attack flowing seamlessly into the next, creating a continuous wall of destruction that left no room for error. 15 seconds into the fight, Marcus realized he was going to lose. 30 seconds in, he realized something else. Kethvar wasn't actually trying to end the fight quickly. The master was demonstrating the full extent of the gap between them, showing Marcus exactly how much he still needed to learn. This wasn't an examination. It was a lesson. And Marcus was getting tired of being taught his limitations. At 45 seconds, something changed. Marcus stopped trying to survive Kethvar's attacks and started analyzing them instead. The master's technique was flawless, but flawless technique was still technique. It followed patterns, created rhythms, established expectations that could potentially be exploited. Marcus began to fight back, not with the intention of winning, but with the goal of learning. Each exchange taught him something new about how Kethvar moved, how the master's blade functioned, how the accumulated experience of 40 years translated into combat capability. At 2 minutes, Marcus landed his first successful strike, a minor hit that barely registered against Kethvar's armor but proved that the master wasn't untouchable. At 4 minutes, he managed a combination that forced Kethvar to adjust his stance slightly, the first deviation from perfect form Marcus had observed. At 6 minutes, Marcus realized he was no longer fighting just to survive. He was fighting to win. The realization transformed everything. For months, Marcus had been developing techniques designed to exploit his opponent's adherence to traditional patterns. But Kethvar wasn't following traditional patterns. He was improvising, adapting, creating new techniques in real time based on Marcus's responses. For the first time in his academy career, Marcus was fighting someone who thought like he did. At 7 minutes and 30 seconds, Marcus surpassed the academy record for lasting against Master Kethvar. Around the arena, alien students were on their feet watching an impossible battle unfold. Some were cheering, others seemed stunned into silence. At 8 minutes, Marcus began to understand something about combat that all his training hadn't taught him. Individual techniques were less important than the ability to synthesize them into something greater. Power mattered less than precision. Experience counted for less than adaptability. At 9 minutes, Marcus did something that shocked even himself. He started winning. Not decisively, not overwhelmingly, but gradually gaining advantages that accumulated into something approaching control. The flux blade was responding to combat situations faster than conscious thought could process them, shifting forms in ways that complemented strategies Marcus wasn't aware he was implementing. Cathvar's expression had changed behind his helmet. Where there had been calm instruction, there was now something approaching surprise. The master was having to work harder than he'd expected. His attacks became more aggressive, his combinations more complex. At 10 minutes, Marcus achieved something no student had ever accomplished against Master Cathvar. He forced the master onto the defensive. It lasted only seconds, but for those moments, Cathvar was responding to Marcus's attacks rather than pressing his own assault. The impossibility of it sent shockwaves through the watching crowd. At 11 minutes and 20 seconds, Marcus made a mistake that should have ended the fight, an overextension that left him vulnerable to a finishing combination from Cathvar's master's blade. The master took the opening, executing a strike pattern that would have defeated any traditional opponent. But Marcus had stopped being a traditional opponent months ago. Instead of trying to block or dodge the attack, Marcus flowed into it, using the flux blade to redirect rather than resist. Cathvar's perfect technique became the foundation for Marcus's counterattack, turning the master's strength against itself in a way that no established combat doctrine could have anticipated. 13 seconds. That's how long the final exchange lasted. 13 seconds of movement so fast that most of the audience couldn't follow what was happening. 13 seconds of combat evolution occurring in real time as Marcus and Cathvar pushed each other beyond the boundaries of known technique. When it ended, both fighters stood motionless in the arena's center. Cathvar's master's blade was pressed against Marcus's throat while the flux blade, configured into a form nobody had ever seen before, touched the gap in the master's armor where his secondary heart was located. A perfect stalemate. Either fighter could kill the other, but neither could avoid death in the process. For several seconds, the arena was completely silent. Then Cathvar slowly lowered his weapon. "Examination complete," the master announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the grand arena. Student Marcus Chen has demonstrated combat capability equivalent to master-level instruction. Graduation is approved with full honors. The crowd erupted. Some aliens were cheering, others were arguing loudly about what they'd witnessed. A few seemed to be in shock at the implications of what had just occurred. Marcus collapsed to his knees, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The flux blade powered down automatically, returning to its default configuration. Around him, the arena seemed to spin as adrenaline and fatigue combined to overwhelm his senses. Cathvar approached and offered a hand to help him stand. Up close, Marcus could see that the master was breathing heavily despite his armor's life support systems. "How do you feel?" Cathvar asked quietly. Marcus considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, he'd been a quota filler accepted to the academy only because regulations required human representation. Today, he'd fought the most dangerous warrior in known space to a standstill. "Different," he said finally. "Good. Different is what we were attempting to create." Cathvar turned to address the assembled crowd. "Let this demonstration serve as a reminder. Warriors are not born. They are forged. Species characteristics matter less than individual will. Today you have witnessed the emergence of something new in galactic combat doctrine." As the crowd began to disperse, HFY made his way down to the arena floor. The Krillian's expression was unreadable, but his posture suggested something approaching awe. "My roommate, the legend," HFY said. "The Academy will be talking about this fight for generations." "It was just a test," Marcus replied. No, Kethvar interjected. It was proof of concept. For 6 months you have been developing techniques that exist nowhere in galactic military doctrine. Today, you demonstrated their effectiveness against the highest level of opposition. The Master's eyes seemed to glow with satisfaction. Tomorrow, you graduate. Next week, you begin advanced instructor training. Instructor training? Someone must teach these techniques to the next generation of human warriors. The galaxy has spent centuries assuming human limitations were permanent. Today, you proved them wrong. Kethvar gathered his ceremonial weapons. Your real work is just beginning, Marcus Chen. Today, you became a warrior. Tomorrow, you begin learning to create other warriors. That night, Marcus sat in his dormitory room staring at the flux blade. The weapon pulsed with stored energy patterns from the day's fight, occasionally shifting form as it processed the combat data it had collected. Through the thin walls, he could hear alien voices discussing the implications of what they'd witnessed. In 13 seconds, he'd gone from academy student to galactic military legend. The human who fought Master Kethvar to a standstill would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for decades to come. But more importantly, Marcus had proven something that everyone, including himself, had thought impossible. Humans could be warriors. Real warriors, capable of standing against the galaxy's best and emerging victorious. The mockery was over. The real work was about to begin, and somewhere in the depths of space, other young humans were watching Academy recordings, seeing what was possible when someone refused to accept the limitations others placed on them. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. Mocked by the galaxy, the human teen entered class. 13 seconds later, he walked out a black belt.